Steve Harvey, an enduring titan of comedy, a cultural force who transformed Family Feud into a worldwide sensation and immortalized the Steve Harvey Show as a cornerstone of American television history. He is not merely a host or a humorist, he is a phenomenon. A man who journeyed from the depths of despair, once homeless, sleeping in the cold confines of a broken-down car for 3 relentless years, to the heights of fame where his voice echoes in millions of homes across the globe. His ascent was not just a career, it was a resurrection. With magnetic charm and wit honed to a razor's edge, Harvey constructed an empire that towers over the entertainment landscape. He became the embodiment of resilience, a living testament to the power of belief and grit. For decades, he hasn't simply made people laugh. He has redefined perseverance, offering hope to the hopeless and reshaping the very fabric of global entertainment. The name Steve Harvey is now etched into the cultural bedrock, synonymous with triumph, transformation, and truth. He stands behind iconic institutions, Family Feud, Kings of Comedy, and a library of best-selling books that have uplifted, enlightened, and empowered millions. But beneath the glittering surface of his legacy lies a story forged in fire. A tale not of glamour, but of grit. A battlefield of emotional wounds and invisible scars, of broken homes, aching solitude, and tragedies that not even fame could shield him from. For years, the world saw only his radiant smile. Few ever glimpsed the weight he carried, the silent burdens, the private griefs, the soul-deep wounds that clung to him like shadows. This is the story of a man whose laughter masked pain, whose success was born from suffering. Walk with us through a life overflowing with victories, yet marked by storms and sorrow. And before we begin, if you believe Steve Harvey is one of the most powerful legends in television history, show your respect. Hit like as a tribute to the man who gave joy to the world while bearing unimaginable anguish alone. The beginning of a legend is rarely gentle. For Steve Harvey, it was not applause that marked his origin. It was the sound of a dream being torn apart. A sound louder than laughter, sharper than ridicule. At home, his father's boots were dusted with coal and his mother's hands stained with chalk, but comfort never reached the youngest of 5 children. He carried a stutter and a fragile hope, navigating a childhood not filled with joy, but etched with the harsh lines of poverty and humiliation. Born on January 17, 1957, in the coal mining town of Welch, West Virginia, Steve was the son of Jesse Harvey, a miner whose lungs bore the black imprint of endless hours underground, and Alois Vera, a teacher who stretched every dollar until it snapped. When the family relocated to Cleveland, Ohio, settling on East 112th Street, they entered a world of rough neighborhoods and scarce opportunity. Dreams struggled to breathe beneath the crushing weight of poverty. Years later, that same street would be renamed Steve Harvey Way, a tribute to the boy who once walked its cracked sidewalks with holes in his shoes and fire in his heart. Poverty was relentless. With 4 siblings, every resource was stretched thin. Meals were modest, clothes were patched until they disintegrated, and winter nights bit through the walls like icy knives, and layered atop economic hardship was the color of his skin. In the racially charged Midwest of the 1960s, a young black boy was rarely encouraged to dream beyond survival. For Steve, every aspiration was doubly fragile, mocked not only for his poverty and speech impediment, but for the societal lens that judged him before he even began. In school, his stammer turned every sentence into a struggle. Each word was a war. Broken syllables drew cruel laughter, and ridicule carved deep wounds. But the moment that left a permanent scar came one afternoon in elementary school. The teacher asked the children to write about their future. Steve, a small boy with dreams too big for his surroundings, wrote shakily, "I want to be on television." The room froze. Then it erupted in mocking laughter. The teacher, with a sneer, tore his paper in half, shredding not just a page, but a child's belief. A poor, stuttering black boy from Cleveland on TV? Impossible, she scoffed. She even called his parents to complain about his arrogance. Steve would later say, "I still hear that paper tearing. It cut me deeper than words ever could." His mother's face bore the sting of humiliation, but his father, Jesse, looked him in the eye and said, "Write it down again. Put it on your wall." Read it every morning and every night. Make it your promise." That command became sacred. From that day forward, Steve recited his dream like scripture, clutching that scrap of paper as if it were his lifeline. When he graduated from Glenville High School in 1974, the vow still burned in his chest. And years later, when the impossible became reality, Steve Harvey never forgot. Every Christmas, he sent his former teacher a new television, with a note attached. Silent, sharp reminders that the boy she mocked was now inside every living room in America. The wounds of childhood didn't vanish. They hardened into armor. They forged the fire, the voice, and the unbreakable will that would one day make Steve Harvey not just a star, but a legend. It's staggering to imagine the distance between a boy's torn paper dream and the thunderous applause of a comedy stage. That child, once trembling in a Cleveland classroom, his voice fractured by a stutter, grew into a restless young man, wandering through a maze of dead-end jobs that drained his spirit and dimmed his light. He wasn't chasing a career, he was chasing survival, and yet somewhere deep inside, the flame of that dream still flickered. Steve Harvey worked with his hands, his back, and his heart, often with little reward. He trudged through snow-delivering mail, his fingers stiff and aching from the cold. He scrubbed carpets until his knuckles cracked and bled. He sold insurance door to door, enduring slammed doors and dismissive glances. He twisted wrenches as a mechanic, and even stepped into boxing rings, absorbing punches for a paycheck. Each job ended the same way, his wallet nearly empty, his soul even emptier. But through every shift, every rejection, every lonely walk home, one fragile promise remained. The vow he once scribbled on paper, "I will be on TV," hung in his mind like a lantern in a tunnel of endless night. It was more than ambition. It was oxygen. And then, one night in 1985, that flicker became a flame. Inside a dimly lit Cleveland comedy club, the air thick with smoke and anticipation, a friend dared Steve to take the stage during an open mic. He had nothing left to lose. With nerves rattling his ribs, he stepped forward. The first joke stumbled, then another, and suddenly the room cracked open with laughter. It wasn't just noise. It was liberation. It was the sound of a man discovering his purpose. When the host handed him $50, Steve walked into the cold night with tears streaming down his face. Clutching the crumpled bill like sacred treasure, he whispered through sobs, "I was born tonight." That moment wasn't just a performance. It was a rebirth. The next morning, he quit his job. For the first time, he knew exactly who he was meant to be. But destiny, as always, demanded sacrifice. The road ahead was jagged and cruel. For 3 long years after that breakthrough, Steve Harvey lived not in apartments or hotels, but in the back seat of a 1976 Ford. That car became his shelter, his kitchen, his sanctuary, and sometimes his prison. A cooler in the trunk served as his refrigerator. Gas station sinks and public pool showers became his makeshift bathrooms. Nights were brutal. Hunger gnawed at his belly until it roared louder than his jokes. Cheap sandwiches were stretched across days, and sleep became his only escape from the ache of emptiness. He would sit in the driver's seat, fog gathering on the cracked windshield, watching streetlights flicker across passing faces, terrified someone might peer through the glass and discover his secret life. "It was so depressing," he would later confess. "You can do it for a week, but 3 years." And yet, even in those darkest hours, he clung to his father's command, "Read your dream morning and night." He murmured it like scripture, whispering hope into the silence of the car. "I believed things would get better," he insisted. And that belief, fragile, flickering, kept him alive. The breaking point nearly came. One night, ready to surrender, he lifted the phone to call his father and admit defeat. But before dialing, he pressed play on his answering machine. 2 messages blinked. The first, a club in Jacksonville offering $150. The second, another gig the very next night for the same amount. Suddenly, he had $300, just enough to buy a cheap flight to New York, where the producers of Showtime at the Apollo wanted him on stage. Had he missed those calls, had he hesitated for one moment, the story of Steve Harvey might have ended in silence. But fate had other plans. Even then, survival was possible only because of unexpected angels. A kind-hearted couple, Rich and Becky Liss, saw something in him, something worth saving. They offered him a carpet cleaning contract and a line of credit for travel. Their faith restored his dignity when shame threatened to bury it. Years later, with tears streaming on national television, Steve called them live to say thank you, vowing to repay their kindness for the rest of his life. Those years of hunger, ridicule, and cold nights in a car did not break him. They built him. Every setback became fuel, every humiliation a stepping stone, until the boy once mocked for stuttering stood ready to face the nation, not as a victim, but as a vessel of triumph. Steve Harvey had been reborn in laughter, baptized in hardship, and now carried the unshakable fire of a man destined to become a legend. The boy who once whispered his dream in the darkness of a Ford now stood beneath the blinding lights of Harlem. It was 1990, and Steve Harvey's name was called as a finalist in the Johnny Walker National Comedy Search. The same voice that had once cracked and faltered in a Cleveland classroom now poured out smooth and sharp, cutting through doubt and erupting into thunderous applause. That night wasn't just a contest. It was vindication. It was proof that the boy mocked for dreaming too big had finally forced the world to listen. And when the doors of Showtime at the Apollo opened to him soon after, he stepped onto that legendary stage carrying more than a microphone. Behind those curtains stood not just a comedian, but a survivor. A man who had endured hunger, humiliation, and years of sleeping in a car that felt more like a coffin than a home. Every laugh from that Harlem audience was more than comedy. It was armor against poverty. A shield against shame, the very sound of redemption. For 7 years, Steve Harvey carried Apollo on his shoulders, transforming the stage into a battlefield where his scars became his strength. Harlem's bright lights replaced gas station flickers. The cheers of thousands drowned out the silence of his loneliest nights. But the price was steep: hosting, touring, writing jokes until dawn. His body bent beneath the weight of relentless ambition. 18-hour days blurred into sleepless nights. His voice, once booming with confidence, grew hoarse and frayed. His back ached from red-eye flights and hotel beds that offered no rest. His mind teetered on the edge of collapse, stretched thin between obligation and exhaustion. He once confessed, "The laugh you hear is the wound I turned inside out." Every performance demanded a sacrifice. Each joke carved from pain, each punchline stitched from humiliation. He bled pieces of himself into every stage, transforming suffering into hope. And as television cameras beamed his image into homes across the nation, the same teacher who once tore his dream in half now had no choice but to see him, week after week, screen after screen. The climb grew steeper, but so did the view. In 1994, he starred in Me and the Boys, and by 1996, The Steve Harvey Show had become a cultural monument, running until 2002. To millions, he wasn't just a comedian. He was proof that laughter could rise from the ashes of despair, but the schedule was unforgiving. Days melted into nights, scripts blurred into stand-up routines. Studios replaced stages, and fame, while dazzling, came with shackles. It stole his sleep. It stole his dinners with family. It stole irreplaceable moments with his children. At the height of his sitcom success, he was a household name, but a ghost at home. He later admitted that while the world knew his face, his own children knew mostly his absence. In quiet hotel rooms, applause faded into a silence so heavy it rang in his ears. Then came the tour that crowned him. From 1997 to 2000, Steve Harvey joined Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hewley, and Bernie Mac for the Kings of Comedy tour. Night after night, arenas trembled with laughter. And when Spike Lee immortalized it in the 2000 film The Original Kings of Comedy, Harvey's name was etched not just into the history of stand-up, but into the soul of American culture. For a man who once wondered if the world would ever remember he existed, the sound of entire stadiums chanting his name was almost unbearable in its beauty. Yet even as his heart swelled with pride, his body whispered warnings. Fatigue, stress, the quiet toll of carrying a crown too heavy for too long. Every cheer, he reflected, reminded me of the nights I went hungry. Every spotlight reminded me of the darkness I came from. But sometimes, he added softly, it also reminded me of everything I missed while chasing it. But Steve Harvey's legacy stretched far beyond the stage. His voice, once strangled by a stutter, became a tool for healing. In 2009, he poured his hard-earned wisdom into Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, a book that turned scars into guidance. It became a New York Times bestseller and was later adapted into a box office hit. More books followed: Straight Talk, No Chaser in 2010, Act Like a Success in 2014, and Jump in 2016. Each one wasn't just advice, it was a survival map for those still trapped where he once stood. The honors came like waves: BET Humanitarian of the Year in 2011, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2013, multiple Daytime Emmys, NAACP Image Awards, the renaming of his childhood street to Steve Harvey Way in 2015, an honorary doctorate in 2016. Yet none of these erased the memory of that Ford. Each time he stood on a stage accepting applause, his mind drifted back to the nights he curled up alone, whispering his father's words. Read it again. Make it your promise. Steve Harvey's rise wasn't a straight climb. It was a resurrection. From Harlem's Apollo to Hollywood's red carpets, from best-selling pages to broadcast empires, he became living proof that faith can carry a man through fire. That resilience can turn ridicule into royalty. But even as the world crowned him, the man behind the smile carried the fatigue of years without rest, the ache of missed birthdays, the sting of empty chairs at family tables, the quiet weight of battles fought in silence. His career wasn't just success. It was the fulfillment of a prophecy scribbled by a trembling child on a torn piece of paper. A dream once mocked, now carved into legend. But even legends are not immune to fate's cruelty. The higher the crown, the sharper the fall. In December 2015, under the glittering lights of the Miss Universe pageant, the spotlight that once felt like salvation turned into a searing blade. In one fateful breath, triumph collapsed into humiliation. With millions watching across continents, he read the wrong name, crowning the wrong queen. The theater froze. Gasps rippled like thunder. Cameras captured every flicker of panic. And in that instant, the man who had built his life commanding a microphone felt as if his voice had been stolen before the entire planet. He later confessed that the moment stretched into eternity. Every second echoed like a lifetime of failure. "I just want to apologize," he said, voice trembling, dignity stripped bare. He chose truth over escape. It became one of the most excruciating public apologies in television history and one of the bravest acts of accountability the world had ever seen. The backlash was brutal. Memes exploded. Late-night hosts turned his pain into punchlines. Headlines declared his career over. Harvey walked off stage into a silence colder than any crowd's roar, carrying the weight of a billion mocking eyes. In the lonely hours that followed, he wondered if 60 seconds had undone a lifetime of work. But he didn't hide. He didn't retreat. He did the unthinkable. He returned to host Miss Universe the very next year. When he stepped back under those lights, scarred but unbroken, it wasn't about the crown. It wasn't about applause. It was about reclaiming his voice, proving that honor isn't measured by perfection, but by the courage to rise when the world laughs at your fall. Yet fate wasn't finished with him. In 2019, NBC canceled his talk show Steve, a program into which he had poured not just effort, but pieces of his soul. It was a show that blended humor with humanity, laughter with life lessons. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. He learned of it almost simultaneously with the public, blindsided by headlines that spoke of endings, not beginnings. For many, such a loss would feel like erasure, as if years of work had been wiped away with a single decision. For Harvey, it was another test of fire. On the final taping, standing before the audience that had shared his joy and tears, he didn't lash out. He didn't crumble. With a steady voice masking the storm within, he said, "This is just a new chapter. I'm 62 years old, and this book of mine still has pages left." It wasn't a shield. It was a compass. A message to himself, and to millions watching, that sometimes the closing of one door is the prelude to a greater one opening, but the bruises kept coming. Smaller, sharper. Offhand remarks ignited backlash. Jokes sparked controversy. In an age where every syllable could be magnified and replayed endlessly, Harvey discovered the peril of being unscripted, unfiltered, human. Each controversy cut like a paper-thin wound. Yet each healed into a scar that whispered discipline, humility, and the weight of influence carried by a man who could move millions with a single line. This pain was different. It wasn't the ache of hunger or homelessness. It was the sting of dignity tested in public view. The same man who once curled up in the back seat of a car now found himself curled up in the glare of memes. His mistakes recycled across digital screens that never forget, but humiliation didn't break him. It refined him. He alchemized embarrassment into endurance, ridicule into resilience. Every jeer became fuel for a deeper purpose. Every time I thought I'd reached the end, he later reflected, God showed me I was just turning the page. By 2019, Steve Harvey had proven a truth far greater than perfection, that life's measure is not in flawless steps, but in the will to keep walking. The boy once silenced by a stutter. The man once shattered by poverty. Now bore scars visible to the world, yet stood taller than ever. When laughter turned cruel and applause faded into silence, he showed the world that the true mark of a legend is not immunity to failure, but the unshakable courage to rise again. It is often said that success demands sacrifice. But for Steve Harvey, the first price he ever paid wasn't fame or fatigue. It was family. Long before the bright lights of Apollo or the roaring crowds of comedy tours, back in 1981, at just 24 years old, he married Marcia, his first love, his quiet anchor. She stood beside him when he was still a struggling dreamer, armed with little more than jokes in his pocket and a vision too fragile to hold. Together, they built a home filled with laughter, not the kind that echoed from stages, but the kind that spilled from the mouths of children who believed their father could do anything. They had 3 children, twin daughters, Brandy and Carly, and a son, Broderick Jr. For a time, their house was alive with innocence, birthday candles, bedtime stories, and the sound of tiny feet racing through hallways. But behind the laughter, reality loomed. The cupboards were often bare, the bills stacked higher than the furniture, and the dream that was supposed to lift them began instead to pull him away. The 1980s were merciless. Steve Harvey was not yet famous. He was grinding through small-town gigs, hustling odd jobs, and sometimes sleeping in his car when money ran out. Nights spent under comedy lights meant mornings missed at home. His wallet was often empty, his clothes worn thin. The refrigerator inside their house as barren as the hope Marcia tried to hold on to. She bore the weight of motherhood in silence, stretching every dollar, soothing hungry children, and watching her husband disappear night after night into clubs that barely paid enough to cover the rent. Steve would later confess, voice heavy with regret, "I lost my family chasing the dream." The marriage unraveled as his ambition grew. The distance between them wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in missed birthdays, cold dinners, and the empty chair where a father should have sat. Marcia's loneliness deepened into quiet resentment. She had married a man but found herself raising 3 children almost alone. The twins often asked why Daddy wasn't home. Broderick Jr. looked for a father figure who was too often chasing laughter in faraway rooms. Steve Harvey's rise came at a cost that no award could repay. The applause that filled stadiums could not fill the silence at his dinner table. The spotlight that crowned him could not warm the cold space between him and the ones who needed him most. And though he would later rebuild bridges, the ache of those lost years never truly faded. He carried that ache with him into studios, onto stages, behind the scenes of sitcoms and talk shows. It became part of his rhythm, part of his voice. A quiet sorrow tucked behind every joke. A reminder that greatness, when pursued without balance, can leave behind shadows too deep to ignore. And yet, even in the wreckage, Steve Harvey kept walking. Not because he was unscathed, but because he refused to let pain define his legacy. He knew that redemption wasn't found in perfection, it was found in persistence, in showing up, in trying again, in becoming better, not just bigger. By the time the divorce was finalized in 1994, Steve Harvey was a man nearly hollowed out, emotionally fractured, financially stripped, spiritually shaken. The ache of absence haunted him. He no longer tucked his children into bed, no longer heard their laughter echo through the halls of a shared home. The man who could make strangers erupt in laughter couldn't stop the quiet tears that fell behind closed doors. For Marcia, the marriage had cost her trust. For the children, it had cost years of a father's presence. And for Steve, it had cost the very foundation of his soul. The wound of losing that first family never truly healed. It became a permanent ache, a shadow that followed him from stage to stage, city to city. Yet even in this darkest personal chapter, the seeds of resilience began to sprout. The pain of failing as a husband and father etched into him a truth he would never forget. Every laugh earned came with a price. And for Steve Harvey, the first and deepest cost was Marcia and the children he loved but lost to the pursuit of a dream. By the mid-1990s, Harvey stood on the brink of everything he had once scribbled on a torn piece of paper. His face on television, his name rising in the comedy world, his future unfolding like a long-awaited sunrise. But behind the glow of success, he carried the silent weight of a broken marriage and the ache of 3 children he seldom saw. His personal life became a quiet void. Airport lounges, hotel corridors, empty dinners eaten alone. In that loneliness, he met Mary Shackelford, a woman who offered warmth and companionship when his life felt like a whirlwind of scripts, spotlights, and solitude. To Steve, she seemed like a second chance, a chance to rebuild what had been shattered. In 1996, at 39 years old, he married her, believing this time the story would end differently. The early years felt like balm on old wounds. Their home echoed with laughter, not from audiences in arenas, but from a family rediscovering its rhythm. In 1997, the birth of their son, Wynton, felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Harvey adored the boy, later calling him my compass, the reason I kept standing. Evenings were filled with simple joys. Steve sprawled on the living room carpet, letting Wynton crawl across his chest while Mary smiled nearby. Weekends meant backyard barbecues, baby giggles mixing with the scent of charcoal, and snapshots that captured a man who, for a moment, looked truly content. For someone who had once lived out of a car, carrying his entire world in a trunk, the sound of a baby's laughter in his own home was proof that redemption was possible. Every smile in those family photos told a story of hope restored. Steve holding Wynton high above his head, Mary's hand resting gently on his shoulder, the promise of stability finally within reach. In those fleeting years, Harvey allowed himself to believe he had outrun the ghosts of poverty, loneliness, and loss, that perhaps this time, love would last. But storms have a way of returning, sometimes darker the second time. In the beginning, there were moments of healing, quiet dinners, the glow of a newborn son. Family photos full of genuine smiles. When Wynton was born, Harvey often cradled him like a fragile miracle, telling friends, "He's my compass, the reason I keep standing." For a man who once slept in a car, holding his infant son felt like divine balance, as if God had finally tipped the scales in his favor. But ambition is a double-edged blade. As Harvey's career accelerated, sitcom tapings, Apollo, Kings of Comedy tours, his marriage began to buckle under the same absences that had unraveled the first. Mary longed for stability. For dinners that didn't end with him packing a suitcase. For nights when the microphone didn't steal her husband away. Steve, haunted by the terror of slipping back into poverty, was consumed by survival and success. What began as small silences, missed phone calls, empty chairs at holidays, grew into arguments sharp enough to cut the very love that once held them together. By 2005, after nearly a decade, the collapse was no longer avoidable. And unlike the quiet heartbreak of his first marriage, this ending came under the blinding lights of cameras. Mary went before the world with accusations that slashed at Harvey's reputation, painting him as unworthy of the very image he had fought to build. Though courts would later dismiss many of the claims, the verdict of public opinion was merciless. His face, once plastered on billboards for laughter, now filled tabloids as a symbol of scandal. "That divorce," he later admitted, "left the heaviest scars on my spirit and on my image." The battles were relentless. Scripts were replaced by affidavits. Laughter by depositions. The rhythm of punchlines by the cold monotone of legal testimony. Interviews that should have celebrated his craft turned into interrogations of his character. He once feared being invisible. Now he was overexposed, dissected, judged for mistakes both real and imagined. Every flash of a paparazzi bulb felt like a wound reopening. Every whisper, a verdict without appeal. Yet the deepest wound wasn't the headlines. It was the fracture at home. Wynton was only 8 when his parents' love collapsed into bitterness. After the divorce, the boy lived with his mother, leaving Steve with only fragments of time, a weekend here, a holiday there. "I could survive the tabloids," Harvey later confessed, "but seeing that pain in my boy's eyes, that broke me." Alone in hotel rooms, he often stared at the ceiling, adored by millions, yet powerless to shield the one child who mattered most. Years later, when Wynton chose to live with him as a teenager, Harvey called it a second chance from God. Proof that some bonds can heal despite the storm. Looking back, Harvey described those years not as a divorce, but as a crucible, a furnace of public shame and private agony. "I thought I had already lost everything once," he reflected bitterly. "I didn't know I could lose even more." The man who had risen from homelessness to household fame now felt stripped again, not of possessions, but of dignity, peace, and the simple comfort of family. And yet he endured. He clung to his faith, to his role as a father, to the stubborn belief that scars could be reshaped into strength. The marriage to Mary Shackelford was not just another chapter, it was the storm that nearly drowned him. The trial that revealed the true cost of chasing a dream. It left him scarred, weary, and humbled. But still, he stood. And in standing, he discovered a truth even legends must learn: the fiercest battles are not fought under spotlights, but in silence, when the crowd is gone and the only witness is your own reflection. It seemed the fire of one storm had barely dimmed before another struck, this time aimed not at Steve Harvey's marriage, but at his very survival. In 2005, in the ashes of his second divorce, Harvey stood not as a titan of television, but as a man staring into ruin. When the court battles ended and the lawyers were paid, he walked to the bank, slipped in his card, and watched the screen flicker back a number so small it mocked him. $1,700. For a man whose face filled billboards and whose voice filled arenas, that figure cut deeper than poverty ever had. "It was humiliating," he later admitted, "to have the world believe you're rich while you can't even breathe." But humiliation was only the beginning. Soon came the cruelest blow, a devastating discovery that for 7 years, due to a catastrophic accounting failure, his taxes had gone unfiled. Principal, interest, penalties. They multiplied like vultures circling, swelling into a mountain so high it threatened to crush him. He had once feared homelessness. Now he feared something darker: prison, disgrace, and the erasure of everything he had fought for. At night he lay in hotel rooms staring at ceilings, haunted by 2 thoughts: what if I lose everything? What if my children see me fall? And yet, in that abyss, Harvey did what survivors do. He fought. He built a plan as relentless as hunger itself. Long before sunrise, while the city still slept, he was already in a studio, his voice carrying over the airwaves on a morning radio show. That microphone became his lifeline, the one battlefield where he still felt powerful, even as debt threatened to silence him. "Every joke I told in those days was paid for in fear," he recalled. "But fear kept me moving." Discipline became his armor, every dollar a soldier, every gig another step against despair. Exhaustion became his daily companion. He worked until his body staggered, radio in the morning, meetings by day, stages by night. There was no luxury, no pause. He stacked opportunities on top of fatigue, refusing to let the avalanche bury him. Out of that grind came his books. Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man in 2009. Straight Talk, No Chaser in 2010. Each page he wrote wasn't just advice, it was a brick wall holding creditors at bay. Then in 2010 came The Turn of Destiny. In 2015, under the bright lights of a televised tribute, the world paused to witness something far more powerful than fame. Jason, Marjorie's son, turned to Steve Harvey and said, "You gave me your last name. There's no one better than you, Dad." The auditorium stilled. The cameras zoomed in. And for a moment, the man who had built empires, hosted shows, and survived storms broke, not as a celebrity, not as a comedian, but as a father finally forgiven. Tears streamed down his face, not from pain, but from grace. For someone who had once whispered, "I lost my first family chasing the dream," those words were not just affection. They were absolution, healing made visible. A soul once fractured, now whole. Life with Marjorie gave Steve Harvey what no spotlight ever could: the quiet miracles of belonging. Evenings where he came home to laughter around the dinner table. Birthdays where every child, biological and adopted, stood together as one. Vacations where he wasn't Steve Harvey the icon, but simply Dad. He often says, "Marjorie saved me." But perhaps the deeper truth is this: she reminded him that he was worth saving. Today, as Harvey surveys the mansions, the awards, the global reach of his name, he insists none of it compares to what he found in her. The man who once slept in a car, who once feared he had lost every family he could ever have, now sits at a table surrounded by children who believe in him. Marjorie turned his house into a home, his regrets into lessons, and his scars into stories of healing. For Steve Harvey, marrying Marjorie wasn't just another chapter. It was the chapter. The moment survival became joy. The moment shame became grace. The moment a man who had nearly lost everything discovered the quiet, ordinary, miraculous truth of having it all. Now, at nearly 70, Steve Harvey stands not just as a comedian or host, but as the architect of a global legacy. His career stretches across continents, industries, and generations of fans. Since 2010, he has been the face of Family Feud, filmed today at Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta, transforming the show into one of the most watched programs in daytime television. Its spin-off, Celebrity Family Feud on ABC, is already set for a new season in 2025. Every morning from 6 to 10 a.m. The Steve Harvey Morning Show reaches millions across the United States and beyond through syndication and podcasts, becoming a ritual in households and commutes alike. Through his company, Steve Harvey Global, he has expanded far beyond American television, licensing Family Feud to audiences in South Africa, Ghana, and soon Botswana, where he will personally host the new version in 2025. His ventures stretch into health and entrepreneurship. With Levate-U, a line of greens and supplements he co-founded, Harvey has fused personal wellness with business innovation, offering products that reflect his own disciplined approach to longevity and vitality. What defines him today is not just visibility, but vision. Harvey has built a diversified empire designed to outlast any single stage, microphone, or contract: television, radio, publishing, production, international formats, business. Each branch is both a platform and a safeguard. Proof of a philosophy he often shares: never depend on one stream when you can create many. It is not fear that drives him now, but foresight. The wisdom to turn past scars into strategy, and strategy into a legacy that will stand long after the spotlight fades. The outward symbols of Harvey's rebuilt life gleam with the scale of an empire. In 2020, he secured one of Atlanta's crown jewels, a 17-acre estate once belonging to Tyler Perry. At nearly 35,000 square feet, the mansion reads like a private resort, a state-of-the-art gym, spa, infinity pool, home theater, and even a hidden ballroom buried beneath the ground, a secret world for gatherings. Public records and media reports value it around $15 million. But its true worth lies in what it represents: permanence after decades of impermanence. This estate is only the latest chapter in a lifestyle shaped by constant reinvention. During his Chicago talk show years, Harvey lived above the skyline in a Trump Tower penthouse. Later, in Beverly Hills' ultra-exclusive Beverly Park, he rented a mansion at a six-figure monthly cost. Proof that, for Harvey, home had become not just shelter, but stage. Vacations have taken him far beyond land. He and his family have been photographed aboard superyachts, their charter prices running into the hundreds of thousands per week, moments of escape earned after years of relentless grind. His garage tells a story in chrome and horsepower: a meticulously preserved 1941 Cadillac, a Rolls-Royce Phantom 8, and a Bentley gifted to Marjorie. Each vehicle less about transportation than testimony. On his wrist, watches become punctuation marks of achievement. A Rolex day date for timeless authority. A rainbow Daytona for exuberance. A Roger Dubuy's Knights of the Round Table for storytelling in miniature. And then there is the style. Under the eye of stylist Ellie Caramo, Harvey has redefined modern menswear at his age. His monochrome ensembles regularly go viral: sharp lines, fearless colors, precision tailoring. each outfit a declaration that reinvention is not bound by time. For a man once measured in scarcity, his aesthetic today is measured in confidence, a luxury far rarer than stone or steel. Yet even in opulence, Harvey lives as a man shadowed by discipline and fear. His greatest battle now is not with applause or contracts, but with his own body. He has spoken openly about high blood pressure, sleep apnea, and the troubling onset of Sjögren's symptoms, conditions that once left him staring at the ceiling in dread, uncertain if morning would come easily. Determined not to let illness steal what hardship could not, he stripped 30 pounds from his frame after 50, submitted himself to the grind of daily training, and built a regimen of full-body strength and relentless cardio. His meals are clean to the point of austerity, his supplements drawn from the very line he co-founded, Levate U. Nights once lost to chaos are now ruled by sleep discipline, not luxury but survival. "Health is my covenant with my family and my audience," he insists, knowing that the same grit that rebuilt his fortune must now guard his flesh. Still, shadows remain. Behind the immaculate suits tailored to perfection lies the quiet ritual of blood pressure cuffs and carefully measured routines. Behind the radiant confidence, the memory of fatigue that once dropped him mid-conversation, forcing him to confront his limits. And beyond the private struggle, the public one persists. The Miss Universe era of 2015, replayed endlessly online, turned into a meme that outlives its moment. He owned it, apologized, returned, yet the sting of humiliation still flickers whenever his name resurfaces, and deeper still is the ghost of scarcity. Even surrounded by acres of Atlanta estate and chandeliers that cast golden light across hidden ballrooms, Harvey admits, "The fear has never left. I still think about $1,700. He confesses the number now less about money than about memory, a constant reminder of how fragile security can be. Applause still fills the air, but when the curtains close, it is the silence of responsibility that roars the loudest, the weight of an empire to maintain. Of 7 children and grandchildren who look to him as patriarch, of a promise that discipline, not fame, will keep them safe. Still, this chapter of Steve Harvey's life is not measured in ratings, contracts, or even wealth. It is measured in healing. With Marjorie by his side, the woman he calls the best thing that ever happened to me, Harvey has turned scars into strength and regrets into wisdom. Together, they built a blended family that proves love can be chosen, stitched together not by blood but by commitment. And when his stepson, Jason, looked him in the eye on live television and said, "You gave me your last name," the world saw not just a father, but a man reborn. "There's no one better than you, Dad." With those words, spoken by Jason on live television, the world saw the culmination of a journey that had begun decades earlier with a stuttering boy in a Cleveland classroom. Steve Harvey didn't just cry, he crumbled. Not from weakness, but from release. From the weight of years spent chasing redemption, from the ache of knowing he had once lost everything and the quiet miracle of being given another chance. That moment wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, sacred, and true. A man once mocked for dreaming too big, now embraced by the very family he feared he'd never deserve. The applause that followed wasn't for a joke or a show, it was for a life rebuilt, a legacy reclaimed. Steve Harvey's story is no longer just about comedy, television, or empire. It's about healing. About the long, brutal road from shame to grace. About the power of showing up not perfectly but persistently. It's about the courage to admit failure, the humility to ask for forgiveness, and the strength to keep walking when the world expects you to fall. He has become more than a host, more than a mogul. He is a patriarch, a mentor. A man whose scars speak louder than his suits, whose silence between punchlines carries more weight than the laughter itself. His empire may be built on entertainment, but his legacy is built on endurance. And now, as he nears 70, Steve Harvey stands not at the end, but at the summit. Not defined by the mistakes that once threatened to undo him, but by the grace that allowed him to rise again. He is surrounded by 7 children who call him Dad, by grandchildren who see in him not just success, but strength, by a wife who steadied his soul and reminded him that love is not earned, it's chosen. He still works, still dreams, still disciplines himself with the same fire that once kept him alive in the back seat of a Ford. But now the dream is different. It's not about being seen, it's about being remembered. Not for the fame, but for the faith. Not for the punchlines, but for the promises kept. Steve Harvey's life is a sermon, a testimony, a living parable of what it means to fall and rise, to lose and rebuild, to be broken and still believe. His story is not just his own. It belongs to every person who has ever been laughed at, counted out, or told they weren't enough. Because if a boy with a stutter, a torn piece of paper, and $1,700 to his name can become a global icon, then maybe, just maybe, there's hope for all of us. There's no one better than you, Dad. With those words spoken by Jason in front of a live audience, Steve Harvey broke, not with restraint but with release. The tears came freely, not from pain but from grace. For a man who had once whispered in regret, "I lost my first family chasing the dream," this moment wasn't applause. It was absolution. It was the rewriting of a chapter he thought had ended in silence. It was proof that even the most fractured stories can be stitched together with love. Today, his net worth is publicly estimated in the 9-figure range. His home, a sprawling 17-acre estate in Atlanta, stands as a monument to decades of grind, grit, and grace. But ask Harvey what matters most, and he'll point not to the chandeliers or the marble floors, but to the dinner table. To the evenings when every child, biological and adopted, sits shoulder to shoulder, laughing, sharing, belonging. To the mornings when grandchildren race through hallways, their joy echoing louder than any trophy case. This is the real treasure, not the empire but the embrace, not the spotlight but the sanctuary. Steve Harvey's life now speaks beyond comedy. It is a living testimony carved from trial and grace, a reminder that resilience can outlast ridicule, that faith can carry a man through fire, and that love, hard-won, undeserved, unconditional, can heal even the deepest scars. The boy who once doubted his voice now uses it not only to make the world laugh, but to remind it to hope, to believe, to endure, and Harvey himself often says it best: applause fades, trophies gather dust, but family, discipline, and gratitude, these are the legacies that endure. So let me ask you, from one soul to another, has there been a moment in your life when you felt reborn, when grace or love gave you a second chance? If Steve Harvey's story has ever touched you, share your reflection below. Your words may be the reminder someone else needs, that healing is possible, that no scar is final, and that the story is never truly over until you choose to write it with love. You gave me your last name. That moment didn't just echo through the auditorium. It rippled through time. It reached back to the boy in Welch, West Virginia, who once stuttered through dreams too big for his surroundings. It reached into the silence of a Ford's back seat, where a man whispered scripture to himself in the dark. It reached into courtrooms, hotel rooms, and empty bank accounts, and it reached forward to a table surrounded by children, laughter, and love. Steve Harvey's story is not a straight line. It is a spiral of setbacks and comebacks, of brokenness and rebuilding. It is the kind of story that doesn't just entertain, it instructs. It doesn't just inspire, it convicts. Because it reminds us that the measure of a man is not in how high he climbs, but in how many times he chooses to rise. He has worn crowns and carried crosses. He has stood beneath chandeliers and slept beneath stars. He has been mocked, misunderstood, and magnified. And through it all, he has kept walking, not perfectly, not painlessly, but faithfully. Today, Steve Harvey is more than a mogul. He is a mirror for anyone who has ever been told they weren't enough, for anyone who has ever lost their way, their voice, or their hope. He is proof that redemption is not reserved for the flawless. It is forged by the faithful. His legacy is not just in ratings or real estate. It is in the quiet moments, a child's laughter echoing through hallways, a prayer whispered over dinner, a second chance embraced with humility, a scar worn not with shame but with pride. And so, as this tribute closes, it opens a door for you, because maybe you've been broken. Maybe you've been silenced. Maybe you've stood at the edge of your own $1,700 moment, wondering if the world would ever see you again. If Steve Harvey's journey has stirred something in you, let it be this: the story is never over. Not until you choose to rewrite it, with grace, with grit, and with love. Share your reflection. Speak your truth. You never know who might be listening. You never know who might need your voice to believe in their own, because healing is possible. No scar is final, and the story, your story, is waiting to be written.